BioCentury This Week is brought to you by Evotec. Evotec is a life science company pioneering drug discovery and development by integrating deep disease expertise, AI-driven innovation, and advanced technologies. Working across modalities, Evotec's fully integrated R&D value chain and flexible partnering models accelerate the journey from concept to cure. A key area of focus is cell therapy, where Evotec leverages cutting-edge iPSC technology, manufacturing know-how, and translational capabilities to deliver scalable, off-the-shelf solutions for complex diseases. From discovery through GMP production, Evotec supports the development of cell-based therapies, advancing regenerative medicine and bringing transformative treatments closer to patients.
Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla announced a most favored nation drug pricing deal at a White House press conference last week. What's in the deal and what's next? We'll discuss that on the latest BioCentury This Week podcast. We'll also discuss how FDA and industry leaders are now meeting to discuss PDUFA negotiations, how multi-site investigator-initiated studies can help bridge the academia-industry gap, and TCGX's new fund. We spoke with Chen Yu about how he is seeing opportunities among headwinds for his new $1.3 billion biotech fund. I'm Jeff Cranmer, and this is the BioCentury This Week podcast, and my colleagues joining me today are
Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Steve Usdin, Washington Editor.
And Selena Koch, Executive Editor.
First up, BioCentury is running a survey to better understand cancer clinical trials. If you'd like to help us identify bottlenecks and best practices to improve trial execution, just go to biocenturysurvey.com. The survey takes about 5 minutes, and as a bonus, respondents will get a complimentary copy of the findings. Okay, well, we got some good news to share. We have a new member of the BioCentury editorial team. You may notice that Karen Tkach-Tusman has not been on the podcast recently. Simone, what's going on? Where'd Karen run off to?
Karen has welcomed a lovely new baby to the world, Micah Louise Tusman, who is, I just saw some great pictures of him. He wasn't yet writing for the distillery, but I think that given that he's only a few days old, we should be flexible on that deadline.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing Micah win.
Lots of happy faces around.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the young tot win some of the stroller derby races down at the farmers market in San Carlos, where Karen and I are both based. And I'm sure the little dog Bobka is excited to cede some of his territory in her flat. Okay. Steve, you wrote a story on Friday with the headline, Pfizer MFN Deal Changes Nothing and Everything. It kind of sounds a little bit like a Samuel Beckett play or something there with the little nothing and everything vibe. What's the nothing?
Well, the nothing is the short-term consequences for Pfizer seem to be negligible. Evidence of that is the fact that Pfizer didn't file any kind of SEC report after the deal. If there had been material impacts on the revenues, they would have been compelled to do that. The immediate cost to other pharmas, assuming this becomes a template for other companies, is going to depend on their exposure to Medicaid, their ability to invest in U.S.-based manufacturing, and kind of the fine print of the deal, which, by the way, is secret. We don't know what it is.
And the everything?
The everything. The long-term changes, I think, are going to be profound and permanent. Price negotiations between the White House and individual companies, which the industry has categorically rejected over the years, have now been normalized. There are going to be more White House pricing negotiations in the Trump administration and with future presidents of both parties. The fortunes of individual companies and of the industry as a whole is going to depend on the strength of the relationships between CEOs and presidents. And in that tussle, the balance of power is tipped toward the Oval Office. And there's some other long-term things, right? The longstanding economic policy, including the notion that consumers and industries benefit from the lowest cost production wherever it occurs, have given way to a mercantilist approach. The idea is now everything has to be manufactured in the United States, or the dollar value of all imports have to be offset by manufacturing in the United States. Look, there's a reason why manufacturing has happened in other countries. And the reason it went to other countries was because it was less expensive and more efficient to do it elsewhere. Unless something changes to make it more efficient and less expensive or higher quality to manufacture in the United States, it's going to continue to cost more to do that. And the products are going to cost more. The cost of goods is going to cost more. And that's going to mean that there's going to be less money available for R&D and less money for other activities.
So, Steve, one of the things that people often think about is how long will a particular policy be in place, right? Now, this is not the only industry faced with that. If you build a manufacturing facility, that is not just for the term of one president, that's a long-term commitment. And so it seems to me that the costs and pricing issues that you're talking about related to labor in the US and mercantilist approach, as you put it, I mean, that doesn't just get undone. You could remove tariffs, but now that's a different thing. Keeping a manufacturing facility and manufacturing in the US is a long-term commitment. So what do you think about that?
I absolutely, that's true. But I do want to backtrack on something. I think that actually one of the biggest impacts for the industry as a whole is going to be, in the short term, certainly, is going to be the commitment to so-called most favored nation pricing and Medicaid. So Pfizer has agreed that it's going to sell all of its drugs at an MFN price to Medicaid. We don't know what the formula is for determining that price. In any case, it isn't a big lift for Pfizer, right? Because Medicaid is 3% of their revenues. But there are other companies for which Medicaid is a much, much bigger portion of their revenues. I talk about this in the story. So consulting firm Vital Transformation projects that benchmarking the top 50 Medicaid drugs to Luxembourg, which is the lowest priced OECD country likely to be included in an MFN analysis, would strip $100 billion in revenue from the pharmaceutical industry in a decade. They also point out that Medicaid prices set ceilings for the 340B discounts. So an MFN benchmark could trigger an additional $250 billion in revenue losses through 340B spillover effects. That's assuming that there isn't any kind of legislative change to the 340B program in response to this concern.
Steve, let me play Joe or Jane Public here for a moment. All right, $100 billion in a decade. It's $10 billion in a year across the whole industry, right? So there's going to be a lot of people. So that might be, I don't know, 100 million per company. I don't know how many companies that would include. There's going to be a lot of patients out there who are like, cry me a river, You can put those very big numbers in. I think until it becomes relevant to people when they see a particular medicine, not that they never had in the first place, but they used to have and now can't get, or that somebody else has another country and they can't get.
Well, see, that's the thing about this. One, it's not going to be evenly distributed across the industry. There are some companies that are heavily dependent on Medicaid, and there's some products that are really important that are heavily Medicaid. HIV drugs, drugs that are for children, children with cancer, children with chronic disease are frequently covered by Medicaid. But I think that the thing about this is it's not so much that you're going to have drugs that are available today and aren't going to be available tomorrow or next week or next year. It's the same problem that the industry has always faced in trying to develop public policy that promotes innovation, which is that you're not going to have things taken away from you. There are things that could have happened that won't happen. And that's something that's very hard for people to grasp. It's very hard for people to have confidence that's true, especially since there isn't a whole lot of trust in the pharmaceutical industry to start with.
I just want to say one more thing about that. I mean, I agree with you, and I really think that that's the industry's challenge. I think so much of this, though, really does come back to access, because so many people, for reasons that I don't know, have time to talk about today, but don't get access immediately to the innovations. So that's why they don't know. There are certainly cancer patients alive today, many, many cancer patients alive today because of innovations that have happened. we do know that there's a lot of people that never get to know, never get to hear about trials or new cancer or new, not just cancer treatments, other treatments. So I think that the industry talks a lot about access, but it hasn't really, in my mind, developed a strong strategy to address that part of it.
So, two things. One is the MFN agreement that Pfizer's reached with the White House, which has other parts to it, which we could talk about, or else hopefully people just read my story about it, is not going to do anything to reduce out-of-pocket costs. It's not going to do anything to increase access. There is an element, well, to backtrack a little bit, there's an element in this that theoretically could, in some cases, change access parameters, which is the Trump administration has announced a portal to direct to patient and direct to business distribution channels that are going to be set up by individual companies. And those channels are going to offer drugs. Basically, they're offering selected drugs at net prices, net of the discounts and rebates that companies typically pay to PBMs. It's really complicated dynamics around all of that, and it could be in the long term that improves access for some people, particularly the uninsured or the underinsured, to some of these drugs. It will also allow the Trump administration to take credit for large drops in prices, because list prices will go down to net prices. Of course, it doesn't change the economics for the drug companies at all.
So, despite its questionable name, the Trump RX website is certainly, and that direct to consumer, direct to patient way of distributing or selling drugs really is going to be something we can continue to watch, because it could be a trend that doesn't go away, and it certainly could change a lot of the dynamics, even if its initial launch doesn't actually have that massive or tectonic an effect, on the drugs that are on there right now.
No, I agree. This is a big change. It's something to watch. There are, I don't know, 7 or 8 companies that have launched these websites now for select products. I think we're going to see more companies launching them. We'll probably see more products on them. Anything that makes drug pricing more transparent is going to be a good thing. Anything that helps patients who are uninsured or underinsured get access to the same pricing that the insurance companies get is likely to be a good thing. So it's going to be, yes, this is a big trend to follow. The really key thing, I think, is going to be to see whether this transitions into a direct-to-business sales channel where large employers directly purchase drugs from pharmaceutical companies, cutting out the PBM middlemen.
So this just seems like there's so many unknowns and possible ways it could play out. But there is a scenario in which, right, pharma profits are squeezed at the same time that they have to pay more to manufacture. And one thing that was curious to me when I read your story, Steve, is that, well, Burlow is the CEO of Pfizer. He's also the chairman of pharma, which didn't seem like it weighed in on this at all. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it means for the role of pharma going forward?
Well, so pharma was squeezed out of these negotiations entirely, and they were kept in the dark. So yes, Albert Bourla is the CEO of Pfizer, and he's also the current chairman of pharma. It's quite clear, both from people who are close to pharma who've told me this, and from the sequence of the timing of the announcements of various things, that pharma was completely excluded from the negotiations, had no idea of what was happening going forward. And the Trump administration played it very smart from their point of view. They negotiated separately with 17 companies. And now the first company to make an announcement, Pfizer, has made concessions and has set a template that it's reasonable to expect the administration to hold other companies to. One of the elements of this deal, of the Pfizer deal, was that the Trump administration has said that they won't impose tariffs on Pfizer's products for 3 years. And at the press conference announcing this, the president and members of his cabinet made it clear that they will use tariffs as a threat for other companies. If other companies don't comply with the terms of the Pfizer deal, or at least give the administration what it wants, then they're going to impose tariffs. That's as Albert Bourla said, that's a serious threat for these companies, and it's something that motivates them to act. I should just squeeze one more thing in here before we have to move on to something else, which is that this is not the last shoe to drop. CMS has sent two proposed rules to the White House Office of Management and Budget for review. One of them is a CMS demonstration project that would regulate the prices of drugs in Medicare Part B. Another one is a similar model for Medicare Part D. I think that we could expect to see those demonstration projects unveiled relatively soon. And if the Trump administration moves on them with speed, which I expect that they will, they could be in effect before the midterm elections, which I think a lot of this, the urgency that's driving all of the administration's actions on drug pricing are aimed at getting effects and being seen to have had dramatic successes ahead of the midterm elections.
All right, Steve. Well, also happening in Washington, PDUFA reauthorization is getting underway. For those less familiar with this, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act was created in 1992. It's got to be reauthorized every 5 years, and the legislation allows FDA to collect fees from biopharma companies to support the agency's drug approval activities. And it's typically accompanied by legislation that has reshaped FDA. Steve, how do you see it playing out this year?
So what's happening today, it's interesting. In the last PDUFA negotiation, industry said to FDA, look, it doesn't make sense for us to just meet every 5 years to start negotiating these things. We should have continuous engagement to talk about this periodically as it's unfolding. So technically, the meeting that's supposed to happen today is the last continuous engagement meeting for PDUFA 7 before they start the PDUFA 8 negotiations. But what I'm told by people who are close to this is that, in fact, of course, they're going to be talking about the beginning of the PDUFA 8 negotiations. The meeting is going to be FDA Commissioner Marty Makary, probably the center directors of CDER and CBER, Bio President and Chairman John Crowley. David Ricks, Lilly's CEO, is going to be representing pharma at the discussions. And it's really going to be kind of seeing how things, setting things up for the negotiations that are going to unfold over the coming year. Things seem to be starting out kind of normally. That's what people who were involved in negotiations told me. But it kind of reminds me of the person who jumps out of the Empire State Building, and when they pass the 30th floor, they say, "Oh, everything seems to be going fine. There's no problems." I will be really shocked if the whole thing goes through to the end without any glitches or without any kind of drama.
All right. Well, it will be something that we are watching here. And of course, Steve's story on the Most Favored Nation drug pricing deal, you'll find it at biocenturypodcast.com. I'll drop a link in the show notes. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about investigator-initiated trials. We had a nice little story about a nonprofit out of Indiana that is trying something new.
From in-licensing to new co's, cross-border deals from Asia are transforming global biopharma. Meet top decision makers and investors at the 12th China Healthcare Summit to explore emerging opportunities and tackle key challenges in this rapidly evolving landscape. Join us in Shanghai October 22nd to 24th to get a first-hand look at China's dynamic life sciences ecosystem. Register and learn more at biocenturychinasummit.com.
All right, we are back, partnering, now open for BioCentury's 12th China Healthcare Summit in Shanghai. It will kick off on October 22nd and run through the 24th. You can register now at biocenturychinasummit.com and start scheduling your meetings so you have a full dance card when you arrive in Shanghai. We hope to see you there. Simone and I are gearing up to head over. Josh Berlin, who you've heard on the podcast, the man behind the curtain of the BioCentury conferences, will be there. Record pharma attendance this year, including many from the headquarters out west, heading over to see what this hot new trend in innovation in China is all about. And we will be continuing to write about this at BioCentury. We've been following the space for almost 2 decades now, and it's just an interesting time to be sure. Okay, investigator-initiated trials, or IITs, have been in the spotlight for their role in fueling speedy data generation in China. We've talked about that a lot. Their impact in the US has been more constrained. And now we have a nonprofit out of Indiana that thinks it's found a way to get more out of US IITs. Selena, you edited this piece that our buddy Lauren Martz wrote. What did you learn?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I think there's another piece of context that makes this story timely as well. So yeah, there's a lot of talk of China speed and IITs, but also there's this long-standing issue, right, of attracting pharma funding for academics who want to do IITs. But that long-standing issue has, gotten worse recently, right? Ever since the Trump administration took over, we've entered this very difficult period for funding of academic research. So there's a need for new models that can, by which industry can kind of step in and help out there. So IITs in the US, serve a couple of functions, and they can help get that first human proof of concept for a cutting edge technology. Think of UPenn and the first CAR Ts. In Europe, we had George Schett then, right, doing proof of concept for taking CAR Ts into autoimmunity. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's just investigators out there who want to take a drug that they might work with in one context and see if it's going to work for another indication that they serve. And so this sort of taking approved drugs and finding the next indication is kind of, I think, that might be a sweet spot for this nonprofit. It's called the Hoosier Cancer Research Network. And so one of the reasons that they were telling our colleague Lauren that it's hard to get pharmas to fund these IITs historically is that the IITs are so small and underpowered, they can't really answer the kinds of questions that a pharma would need to make like a go and no-go decision on developing a new indication. And so that's the thing they're trying to solve. And in doing so, they're hoping they can then attract more of this funding for the academics. And so they're putting together a clinical trial network for IITs that allows academics to not just launch one in their own clinic, but to launch a multi-site IIT where they can get more data across more patients more quickly and generate the kinds of information that pharmas need to make decisions.
Selena, this sounds like a really interesting initiative. I mean, are there others out there? I think that we could probably agree that this is sorely needed.
Yes, they're not alone. There are other organizations doing this. They think they have a niche in kind of smaller trials where they can really provide a service to first-time new investigators who need more support. There are other organizations who are doing slightly larger less trials with less hand-holding, cooperative groups like SWOG, which was formerly known as the Southwest Oncology Group. Another one, the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group, is also doing this, and they have, I think, some regional differences among them as well.
Okay, one last question. What if we've got people listening who want to get in touch with them? Do you know how they can do that?
Well, Simone, HCRN is run by CEO Brian Stemme. That's Stemme. And I will drop a link in the show notes to HCRN's website, and I'm sure they have some good contact information there. Turning to finance, TCGX, that is TCG Crossover Fund, raised a new $1.3 billion fund. Our colleague Paul Bonanos, lead news editor here at BioCentury, spoke to Chen Yu of the firm. And Yu sees attractive valuations in private and public equities at the moment that could turn into strong returns and draw LPs back into biotech. He told Paul the question for LPs or limited partners isn't which firms are better than others. It's should I be deploying any money into biotech at all? He called it the toughest environment for general partners in 20 years. But he says, hey, the worse the market is, the faster we want to deploy. And it's his view that this is really an attractive cycle in which to invest. And says that he's seeing valuations at 30-year lows.
So tell us their scope geographically, and is it bigger than previous funds? Give us some contours.
That's a good question. I mean, so the new fund came in above the $1.2 billion goal at the hard cap. They brought in some new LPs to supply cash along with returning LPs. And the firm's first fund, which came out in 2021, was at $824 million. Second fund was early last year at $1 billion. So they now have $3.1 billion in cash. Invest in private and public, primarily in the US, I believe. Notable M&A exits catch some of these names. Carmont, which went to Roche, Gracell, taken out by AZ, and Raise Bio. So some pretty solid exits in its since launching that first fund 4 years ago. Now, another thing that we're following in the realm of finance is what's happening in Hong Kong. NASDAQ, of course, it's been a little sleepy on the IPO front. We're starting to see follow-ons tick up, but the market for new biotech listings in Hong Kong has been gaining momentum. We saw a wave of filings that fattened up the IPO queue going into the fourth quarter. I think it helped that it's the Mid-Autumn Festival and National Day was on October 1st, so a lot of companies kind of rushed to file. We had 8 companies last week, and already we had one company get out so far this week, Shuanju Biopharmaceutical. They raised $100 million on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange to support a pipeline of GI and oncology therapies.
And speaking of the IPO queue, stay tuned for our quarterly public markets preview. That's coming up this week. In there, you'll see a little more data on the queue, including the 36 proposed filings on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which represent about, as of September 30, the end of the quarter, represented about 84% of the global IPO queue.
And taking advantage of a market that's on the upswing, the Hang Seng Biotech Index has been roaring this year. So good to see China's first bear market. Maybe they're coming out the other side. And I know that even looking in the U.S., I think Chen Yu was telling Paul that he believes the next 3 months will be crucially important for biotech. He says that risks around geopolitics, U.S. policy and drug pricing, what Steve was talking about at the top, he says these are threats that could be dramatic or even existential. But he says the sector is cautiously optimistic, but a little scared. So definitely moving through some strange waters right now. But hey, he just raised over $1 billion and he's ready to invest. So that's good news for biotechs, public and private. All right, that is our podcast for you today. We'll be back next week to talk about the 4Q preview, which Selena's editing as we speak, or right after we stop speaking. I think she'll jump right onto that. Steve, of course, has his work cut out for him with companies racing to sign deals with the White House. We will catch you next week. We'd like to thank Kendall Square Orchestra, which provides the music for BioCentury this week. Tickets now on sale for the group's 8th season. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.
BioCentury would like to thank Evotec for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. To learn more about how Evotec can support your goals through pioneering drug discovery and development solutions, go to evotec.com/innovation.